So let me just start with providing a couple of stories around here. So once upon a time, there was a lady who spent a good part of her life in getting that dream job. She put anything in front of her in terms of relationship, in terms of the quality time with the family, just to get that dream job. And then what happens after 2 or 3 years? She was laid off. That is a devastating experience. But long story short, she went on to become a very successful YouTube influencer. Another story, one of a person got arrested because of some malpractices by his organization, which he wasn't aware, but because he was representing the organization, he got arrested and he was put behind the bars in jail for a month. And when he came out, he transformed completely as a published author, as an influencer, as a motivator, and so on. And that is also one of the story. There are a lot of stories if you talk about the people who faces hardship. They haven't kind of looked into a situation because they never ever dreamt of. Just think about a person who's standing in a gigantic amusement park where none of the rides are working, totally blanked out. This is a part, a part I would say, one side which I'm kind of explaining. And then the other side is about the people who are totally fine with it. They are just seeing what's going on uh, in their premises with their loved ones. Now, if you're wondering what exactly I'm talking about, this is basically I'm talking about the impact of someone who is fired, who is laid off, who is kind of let go from their organizations, and what is the impact for them and the surroundings around them. So that being said, we are going to discuss those situations. And I'll also, at the end of the conversation, I'll share a few articles about what is the foundation of these discussions to make you think about what are the different impact situations, life situations happens when someone is going through this tough time out there. So that being said, first of all, it's my privilege again to welcome my colleague and dear friend, Carson. Thank you so much for spending some time about this pretty delicate and I think your personal situation as well in the past.
No, absolutely. So, Rob, it's always good to spend time with you as well, and appreciate the opportunity. I mean, losing a job, losing a role, being laid off, all these things, these can be crucibles. Living in them in the moment, they can feel very catastrophic. They can have very immediate and dire ramifications, not to mention the toll that it can take on us psychologically and mentally. These are all very real ramifications. I look back on my career, and I've had a couple of times where I've lost jobs through no fault of my own, and one time where my role was eliminated, and fortunately I was shuffled into another role. But these things. Looking back in those moments, there was a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity, and it was very challenging to navigate through. But there is definitely some things that emerge. You look back, and I was fortunate to emerge better as a result of these experiences.
Exactly. So this is something which, and when I was trying to prepare for this discussion with you, I was trying to see that obviously there is one angle which we always discuss about the hardship what people really face, but obviously there's so much impact on the people who are still in the organization. So, which I was going through, like the workplace survivor syndrome
Yeah.
about the people who are already there, what kind of sentiments and what kind of thought process goes along with them, because obviously they lost a colleague in terms of having that quality time, or some people have an anxiety about, oh, okay, so I may have to do more work, or am I be the person, the next one? So there are a lot of things from that perspective, which we are going to discuss. So Carson, coming back to you, You mentioned that you have a personal experience. So can you help us walk through a bit of the journey and obviously what you learned from that?
Yeah, in the moment, there's just almost a complete and utter shock, right? You go through and you start to, and it's very normal. I want to add, you look back and you ask yourself, is there something I could have or should have done differently? Is there, what do I do now? What do I do next? There's so many, and I think all of us at least know, like, hey, we need to create dialogue perhaps with our network, or we need to get a kind of an accumulation of our experiences. But in that moment, it's very hard to put one foot in front of the next. So I think those were my experiences. And I think the other element, and I know we were talking about a couple of articles that you shared with me this past week, and just kind of looking at those, one of the themes that really that drew me in was, you're not going to recapture exactly what you were doing. And so, no matter what your next role is, it's not going to be exactly the same as what you did previously, for better or worse. I think it's important to assess in that moment, and in the moments upcoming, right? You need to assess, what are some of the key skills and experiences that I have that can be valuable for someone else? What are the things that I love, that I'm passionate about, that I want to parlay into my next experience. Those are the key things. You always want to try to find ways that you can add unique value to an organization, to an employer. And so I think it's important to really assess and realize that your next role is not going to look like your last one. And that's okay. That's perfectly normal. In fact, you're going to find new things that you can gravitate toward. The biggest realization that I had, Saurabh, in all of that,
Mhm.
was that years ago, when I lost a job for the first time, I didn't have the network that I felt like, or that I would have needed, frankly. I anticipated retiring from that organization. I had been there for a considerable amount of time. The change for me came completely out of the blue. And I experienced all of those things: shock and despair, and not really knowing what to do. And, in my haste, I was going out and, applying to roles online. But you got to realize, when you do that, you're up against maybe 1,000 or more other candidates. How can you stand out? The things that give you a better probability for success are relationships. And so, I always tell people, even right now in this moment, if you're even in an organization where there are layoffs and you're the survivor, you've always got to be investing in relationships, and always got to be investing in network and your own skilling, the things that are going to make you a brand as opposed to just an employee. That's what's transferable. People are going to invest in you and hire you because they believe that you'll solve the problem that they have. Those are the types of things that can make you more and more valuable in the market. Things that I didn't realize years ago, when I felt like I could just get another job because of my resume or because I was a hard worker. But in those moments, that's when it's very challenging, because it's fresh, it's raw. You have to process certain elements of it, and it took me a long time to get over some of those components. And I want to say again, it's all okay. That is all very normal. But as quickly as you can, assess what relationships do you have that might be able to assist you in kind of exploring some next roles. Cast a wide net. I think the one thing is, just because you think you have a really strong lead at a next job, don't bank everything on that. Don't stop exploring other roles, because until there is an offer on the table, and frankly, a tangible start date. I mean, I've even had offers on the table that didn't pan out in my career. I've had a lot of things that I've experienced. So I can tell you, don't bank it all on one thing. Keep exploring these relationships, keep exploring opportunities. And, at the heart of it, the most important thing is finding ways that you can, infuse what you're passionate about, what you're great at, and what you have experience with doing, and problems that you have experience of solving, how you can parlay that into your next role.
That's sorry. That's so true. Actually, you covered few of the essential points about how exactly you have to be kind of prepared One is obviously you have to reach out to the network, but even before that, you have to build your network. And that is one thing, because when everything is going fine, as a human tendency, we have a way of taking the things lightly. And then you also mentioned about how exactly these things are pretty okay. And whenever someone loses a job, I know that there are a lot of people who would try to empathize or even sympathize or provide some kind of a solutions, but there is a moment when people do not want any solution. They have There's a time, right, when you're really sad or depressed or you're trying to evaluate. So, but obviously that should not be prolonged. So in that way, you have to think what's next and how exactly I have to repurpose either my skills or the things which I always found to be enticing. I would like to go ahead with a particular entrepreneurial mindset. So, that being said, in one of the Harvard Business Review articles, which again at the end of our conversation, I'll put all those information as a link as well. They mentioned that there are two kinds of people. One is recreators, and other one is repurposers. So recreators are those that at the in this unfortunate event, they will try to upskill them and then try to go back to a similar kind of organizations or jobs. The other one are repurposers, which means that they go in a different path altogether, get into entrepreneurial skills. And when I started, some of the stories about a person who went to jail, or a lady who becomes a YouTube influencer. So those are in the area of repurposers. So when we are in the situation, we have to see what we are trying to do next. Are we really want to have the same kind of skill set or not? But there's a third one, which is sometimes people get into and led to an abyss, which is uh, a mindset of doing nothing. They think that, okay, I think this is the end, I cannot do anything, and they just keep on sulking, and it is a prolonged affair, right? As you mentioned, that it's perfectly okay to feel like that, but then you have to come out of it. So that is one of the dark side. So at this point, if anyone is encountering these kind of situations, so they have to go through and see that which part of the aisle they belong to, and then try to work through that. So I would like to, I'm very intrigued about your perspective that after listening to these two, like recreators or repurposers, what's your input when you were undergoing the similar kind of mindset or similar kind of rather situation? In that case, were you thinking about these things, or what's your perspective around that?
To a degree. No, that's a very astute observation and question, because I think
Yeah.
the gut instinct in me was that I should go back to what's maybe feels safe, kind of that recreation, right? Find something very similar, find something doing something that's got a lot of similarities, maybe go to a competitor at the time, or maybe go to someone else doing something very similar to that. But the key thing that you realize in this, Sarab, is that no matter where you go, you have to recreate everything within that organization anyway. You still have to go in, you have to pay dues, you have to learn their way of doing things. I think one of the things that jumped out at me the most was almost that assumption of, well, I did this at this organization, so I should be able to walk right into this organization and do the exact same thing. And that's not the case. My first role back from losing a job for the first time was I made significantly less money, had significantly less job responsibilities. And so there was almost needing to work back toward and build a new wealth of experiences. Now, what actually ended up making the biggest difference is that next job that I got after losing my first one, I got laid off from that one too, about a year later. But guess what? I had made very important relationships there that led me to my very next place of employment. And I made very important relationships there that led me to where I am today. And I think it's important to realize that all the while you're building different skills and you're building different relationships. You never know exactly how these are going to pan out or be of benefit. The only thing you can control is your inputs. How are you investing in these relationships? How are you investing in yourself? Continuing to learn, continuing to grow. There's always going to be that trepidation. I don't think after you lose a job, I don't think you'll ever 100% feel comfortable in any role that you're ever in again. And this is a catch 22. You always live under the constant, hey, something could happen to my role. But at the same time, for some of us, for me, it's actually brought out, in my mind, probably a better version of myself, because it made me realize that I need to keep investing in myself, that I need to keep accumulating these experiences, but most importantly, investing in relationships. And that was what I didn't realize in my first job years ago that I ended up losing, was that I needed to invest more in the relationships, not just in the people that I worked with or that worked for me, but being able to, connect with other people, connect with colleagues and aspirational mentors that, were outside of just my office building, right? There's a lot of things that I could have been doing. And so I learned that. But I think those were some of the key realizations for me. And, I see a lot of people that, for instance, they'll go out on social media now and post about their experience. And I think that's the good. There's some elements of that are cathartic and therapeutic, and to be able to go out there and just, be heard, and have people empathize. But also it's a great place to get help. I've noticed many times that, I'll see posts like this and I'll lean in immediately. If there's something that I can do, I can't hire everyone today, but if I can make an introduction to somebody else who's hiring for something like you're doing, like whatever it is, I think that's how we can continue to invest as well. Especially if we're amongst the current survivors, right? How can we lean in and help the people that we're seeing, suffer from a layoff? How can we help them just get that one key piece, that introduction to someone, that recommendation for a job, whatever it is? These are all things that we can all be doing.
That's so true. I think one of the things which really stands out of what you mentioned in this segment is that it always brings a better version of yourself in the way that you become more strong. And I was reading somewhere around the similar thing is that a little bit of paranoia. Paranoia is something which is healthy, because, for example, if you have faced a layoff condition twice in your life, then you would be more willing to be more vigilant. You would be always investing more time to make sure that you are always up to date from the skill, because you've been to that particular situation in your life. So that is so important. I think this is one of the uh, learnings for all the people who are surviving in that workplace, or maybe thriving itself. I mean, it depends on what situation you are in. Is that it's very important not to have that laid back attitude that I know it all. As in Microsoft, we always say that it's learn it all, right? So this is very important, to ensure that we try to try to keep helping. And obviously the thing which you mentioned about the networking, which helps me to get to a next section about the workplace survivor syndrome. So you mentioned about what are the impact, and then we discuss about the some of the proactive nature about how we can prepare ourselves. But the people who are unscared about all these things, they are just doing the job. And again, this is another article which I think few of the things in an article is maybe holding a grudge against the company, productivity plummet, and maybe have an apprehensions that more cut is coming down the line, and maybe having a bit of a disgruntled attitude for those people who are still there. They're working fine. So what do you think about how people can improve and have a positive mindset? The people who are the survivors in this layoff and they are doing good, or maybe if they are not doing so good
Yeah.
based on their interpretation, what's your perspective that how they can come out from these syndrome and have a healthy culture and improve in terms of assisting the organization in productivity and the progress.
Yeah, no, I love the question. I mean, it all starts with gratitude, right? I mean, if anything, when you see these types of things happen, especially too, like if it's happened to you before, it's one of those things. I don't think anyone ever sets out saying, "I want to lay people off," right? So there's no malice that's intended through these things. It's important that we look internally, no matter what side of the coin we're on, and we realize what's the right step forward. For those of you who have not been laid off, but you've had colleagues that have been, I think the key element is, okay, first off, there is an element of gratitude that, hey, I have a role. I have the ability to, at any point in time, with or without layoffs going in, with or without other variables in the equation, I have a decision every single day to bring my best self to the table. And I think if we're honest, all of us would admit we're not always bringing our absolute best self to the table every single day. And there's a high bar on performance, especially during challenging times, right? There's a lot of pressures. There's a lot of expectations. And, I can tell you, like, looking back now in hindsight, even though going through some of those moments, both when I was seeing other people laid off or when I was being laid off, I see the value that change in trajectory had for me, because it forced me to get better at things that I was not good at. But in those moments, that's not the takeaway. The takeaway is, here's a sudden, immediate, drastic change. And if you're one of the survivors, and yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, Saurabh, like, we may be sitting here thinking, well, I'm not going to be able to fill this role, or the company's not going to fill this role. That means more work for me. Well, at the same time, that's also more experience for you. It's more value for you. These offer opportunity to rise and meet that challenge, while at the same time, looking for ways to continue to bolster your network and to help those who perhaps have been laid off. Continue to add value to what you bring to the table. Continue to add skills, transferable skills, understanding your value in the market. These things are also super important. We've talked about the value of personal brand before. These things are all realizations that, frankly, I had as a result of being laid off. If I was still working at that first job that I had over a decade ago, or still in that same organization, I don't know that I would have invested in some of these key attributes, key learnings, the way that I have. And so even just witnessing other people going through that kind of turmoil, I think ideally it prompts us all to be more aware, more self-aware, and make necessary steps to invest in ourselves, which is not a bad thing. So there can be some positive, responses and results as a part of this, despite the pain and the growing pains that we're going through during these times, whether you're on the side of the layoff or not.
Yes, that's true. I mean, it's always a learning for people who are undergoing that. Obviously, we can empathize, but they understand the true feeling about that anxiety, that fear, that uncertainty. And the people on the other side of the aisle, they can empathize, but they learn that as you mentioned, that self-awareness is so important. They should be kind of learning that, okay, what if this would have happened to me, right? Do I have blind spot? Do I have some kind of gaps in my skills where I can really up the game, as you mentioned, that keep on learning? And one of the things which, as you always mention, and the people who are listening and watching this for the first time, to Carson as well, he's obviously a number one social seller and have so much of insights about the personal branding he mentioned before. We all already have a podcast recorded with Carson about the personal brand, which you can definitely go back and listen to. But coming back to this particular topic, is that you have to be more proactive and prepare yourself. Now, in terms of going that, what is proactivity looks like, and as we are going towards the end of our discussion, Can you provide some points for the people at this time who are undergoing the layoff, like they're still looking for the job, and the point for those people who are the other side of the aisle who still have job, and how exactly they can also improve themselves?
Love that question. It's so
Mhm.
important. And, again, I look back and I want to reiterate, I've done some really great things in my career. I've had some wonderful experiences. I've won awards by all practical purposes. Like, I've done some things that would be deemed successful, but it has not come without its heavy dose of occasional angst, losing multiple jobs in my time, numerous setbacks, lots of losses, things of that nature. But I think the key element is kind of that always looking. I like to call myself a perpetual optimist. I always look at the bright side of everything. And even in layoffs and loss of job, looking at ways that you can accumulate the experiences that you have, write a resume to, or a LinkedIn profile to, some of the things that are unique about you that you can bring to the table. How can you, and how have you leveraged your unique superpowers to reveal wins for other people, or solve problems for your leadership or for customers, or whatever that looks like? Every one of you, every one of us, we have a unique story. And the more that you can find comfortable mediums like video, podcasting, blogging, making posts and shares, going out and building community around what you do, the more you can do those types of things to evangelize your brand and create meaningful, authentic relationships as a result, these things are crucial. I think the most important element of it all comes down to relationships. And how can you, go out and think about and be intentional about what are the relationships that I'm going to need and want for wherever I might want to go in my career. And sometimes that's foggy. If you ask me today, what is my next job going to be? I have no idea. But I am proactively going out and creating relationships with people that I might want to work with or want to work for down the road, right? Because today I'm good, but we all know that things can change. And that's the very impetus of our conversation today. If and when things change, have I built the insulation from a personal branding perspective, from a relationships perspective, and from an experiences and knowledge perspective to do what I might want to do next? And those are the things to ask yourself, because no matter where you are, whether you've been laid off, whether you're preparing in case you ever are, these are the steps that we can take today. And these are the things that we can control today to make sure that we've at least insulated our career as best we can.
That's so true. Insulation towards all the different things going out in the surroundings is so important, because obviously, as you mentioned, that you cannot control. The others are the things happening around you, but what you can control is yourself, about self-awareness, what you want. And as you mentioned, that irrespective of where you land, whether you have job or you do not, you really have to keep striving. And one of the things which one of my other coach mentioned as well is that he always recommend to have some side hustles. As you mentioned that you are either in the form of podcast, any other things. I mean, each and every human being has a certain talent, a passion, which they can definitely look forward to. So if you have a side hustle, you not only bring that experience to your current job, it changes your mindset, it changes a lot of things which we cannot say right now because we do not recall all of the things, because a lot of things are abstract. And you also mentioned about relationship. Put yourself out there, whatever the medium you want. Right now we are focusing on the medium of social media at this point. Whatever works for you, just try to make sure that you people know about you. And one of the thing, again, last thing I would say just pop up to my mind, Carson, is obviously some people ask me about going through all these I mean, especially one of your the episode of personal brand is like, I'm not feeling comfortable in reaching out to the people. I'm a bit of the introvert side of the house. What do you suggest, again, like people who are not very comfortable talking to other human beings, and which totally we can understand? What are the different ways from your perspective you always teach people to have some sort of influence in this aspect?
Let me start off by saying that I'm an introvert, believe it or not. And being an introvert doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to talk to people. It's just that you
Mhm.
want to feel more comfortable
Yeah.
around that. If it's a shared experience, or if it's, just again, like we talked about, finding mediums that you are comfortable with.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest hurdles that a lot of people have around branding is not knowing what to post, or not wanting to put themselves out there for fear of some type of rejection and things of that nature. And don't get me wrong, I mean, those things are out there and they can happen. I've
Mhm.
created blogs that nobody read, or that got negative feedback, or videos that nobody watched, or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. But it's all a body of work. I've been doing some of these things for the better part of a decade, right? And I think the key element is finding some of these things that you're comfortable with, but also being open to what the experience might be. And I mean, it could be something like, finding communities online that are, very similar to what starting small, starting with something that you're comfortable with, and getting good at that. It's interesting because I started blogging years ago. I wasn't using video. I wouldn't have been comfortable using video, but then I tried it, and I felt like it was a good way for me to convey. It was, it was easy for me to sit and create a video, not knowing exactly what the response was. And sometimes for me, I take the flying cannonball leap into the deep end of the pool and see what happens. And, I never completely jettison any way of meaningfully connecting with other people. So for me, I've had, meaningful connections that have come out of everything that I've created at some point in time. The last thing I'd say is, like, for instance, podcasting. I became an accidental podcaster a couple years ago because I was having conversations that I was recording with people at the beginning of the pandemic, around selling and leadership and some of the things that were top of mind for us. And, because we couldn't have the conversations face to face. And then it kind of beget this whole thing. Other people started calling it a podcast. People started reaching out to me saying they wanted to be on my podcast, which I didn't have a podcast, right? But it turned into meaningful conversation and dialogue. And I think that's the key. Find ways that you are comfortable with in order to build community and build relationships. And even if it's, you don't need a lot of relationships. It's kind of like friends. You don't have to have 100 best friends. You really only need one or two really meaningful relationships that could be great mentors, great colleagues, great future colleagues. You never know where those things are going to go. So the last thing is just having that open mind of where it could go. Find places that you're comfortable with going, and ways that you're comfortable connecting with and meeting with, and conveying your thoughts, and test the waters and see where it goes. It's never, you can absolutely change your approach. I've changed mine many, many times over the last decade. But I think the key is just finding ways to capture and convey what you're passionate about, what you're an expert of, and the value that you can bring to others.
Definitely. So that's so great. Yeah, bring value, try to be fluid in terms of changing the course over the period of time. And you mentioned about have a meaningful conversation with the people whom you are very close to. You don't have to really reach out to hundreds of people at the same time, because that's how you can slowly build the muscle and then be more comfortable. And that is the start. And then you have your own story. Everyone has their own story, and only one thing is common, is that they took that first step. So that being said, Carson, thank you so much again for coming onto the show, and really beneficial. And please keep encouraging us. And as I mentioned, that I'll deem you as my coach here. I learn a lot about your videos, and sometimes we have those one-on-one conversations as well. So thank you so much for providing these insights always.
Thank you, Saurabh. Always a pleasure.
Sure. Thank you.